Each year, Microsoft Research hosts hundreds of influential speakers from around the world, including leading scientists, renowned experts in technology, book authors, and leading academics, and makes videos of these lectures freely available.
We're going to go ahead and get started. One thing that we wanted to just say really quickly is if we can ask everyone to go to Drop It To Me WAC MSR workshop and make sure and upload any documents, any slides that were given yesterday, any of your documents that were created today. We want to have all the raw material, and so we're asking, Alyssa created this site. The password is MSR workshop. So it's Drop It To Me WAC MSR workshop with the password MSR workshop, and upload your files there. So where did Alyssa go? Oh, you're right there. Okay. I'm in charge. Okay. Well, I think the first group that we wanted to invite up, was there another announcement, or was it just a? But you have the piece of paper.
The whole plan is we have each group for 10 minutes with a maximum of 5 minutes for questions. And we were going to insert a little break in the middle, but we're a little worried that since we're behind that will mess things up. So we're going to ask that you instead don't consider each other rude if you get up to go get a coffee or a soda. There's no planned time for a break anyway, but there's all this coffee and soda out there. So just go. Don't think it's rude, okay? And then Marguey Avery, who's back there, is going to try to summarize the themes of what people say on the fly after the 6 presentations by the groups. And then we're going to try to have a group discussion of what format we would like this information to take when we're done. Okay, so we can have a website with a clever name. We can have a publication that's online. We can do all kinds of things. Okay, so in the back of your mind, think about what you would like as a way to communicate this to your friends. And it's do you have the URL? You got the site? Yes. It's just MSR workshop. It's not working? No. It worked yesterday. It worked yesterday. I don't know. I'll check into it. Is it but lowercase, uppercase? It's not all lowercase? Neither working. I don't know. It doesn't like you? I don't have another theory. Did anybody else get it to work? I got a lot of stuff yesterday with that password. There was an email that was sent around that had the link and the password in it, so you can copy and paste. I don't know what the problem is. Maybe this, I don't know. Anyway, right, so just the order. The order will be?
Literature will go first. Literature will go first, and then media, platforms, resources, and then review and recognition will go last.
Okay, thank you. Right, so as you can imagine, we spent some time on the definition of literature, and I guess it's not going to surprise any of you, but I'm going to go through it anyway, because this is a document that is meant to be conveying the results to a wider audience, conveys the original results of investigations, insight techniques, etc. The scientific journal article does remain a key unit, but you want to dig into it. And also there are other formats of scientific contribution, freestanding software, data, videos, etc., that can be increasingly communicated and linked directly, and we need to facilitate that. And then the internet offers the opportunity to enhance the reproducibility, the permanence, the attribution and citability, all of these properties of the literature that you all know about and that we want to enhance. So this is our top-line statement of what we are trying to do and why. And then the matrix, we all referred to the matrix. No, not that one, the previous one. Don't give away the surprise. So this encapsulates the framework of our discussion, and actually possibly the framework of other discussions in this workshop. So down the left hand, you've got what we consider to be aspects of the literature, examples of the literature. So you've got articles, software, methods, data, annotations, grey literatures, government and technical reports out there, posters, preprints, books, blogs, patents. And then across the top we have the issues that we're trying to address. And what we did was to populate the boxes that we thought we could discuss and deal with. But that's not to say that the other boxes aren't equally important. It's simply these are the ones that we had time to get around to. So, for example, I mean, just to highlight one, we spent a bit of time today on the data and what is the key issue. If you ask what is the key issue in data, is it launching a data journal or what? And we decided to just say data as a citable publication is a key issue. But these are just issues, whereas what we're meant to be doing is coming up with tools. So if I can go back to the heading and go to tools and technologies. So, in fact, I'm going to scroll right down to the bottom as well. If you can just get that's right. Thank you. So, in looking at the tools, we focus mainly on the author's role in generating the research literature and how they can be assisted to help achieve those goals. I'll come on to that in Figure 2, but a point we wanted to make also is that there are lots of things that researchers can do in adding metadata, in adding annotations or whatever, even at the root source of what turns into the end into a publishable object of any sort. And one doesn't want to lose that in the process of then disseminating it. So we did capture one statement that publishers need to think about that and to help that researcher direct communication to the user using metadata, using this stuff that's buried in the literature, making sure that the publishers don't stamp on that. The publishers can add their own value, of course. Before we go into that final figure, which actually is where we put the tools, I just wanted to mention the policy issues that we did identify. So there is the question of who's going to pay for all this, and it just never really gets addressed. It is beginning to get addressed in some high-up places, but the funding agencies, governments have a lot of role to play in the long run, and anything we can do to really try and get people to focus on that would be better. We wanted to highlight the fact digital libraries were represented around the table and repositories. We did want to identify some people who have taken a lead there. You're probably all familiar with that, but there are lots of universities that need to catch up and need to be funded to catch up. And then and what they do in there also needs to be done. However, I want to go back to the key point, which is for this workshop, the main output, I guess. Figure 2 is a sketch of some of the tools currently available in helping authors do their job. And at this point, I'll hand over to someone whose knowledge of this landscape is much greater than mine. Alex, where are you? This is you.
So we also recognized, we tried to dissect the things about what you consider the traditional literature and the strengths and weaknesses, and I forgot my notes already. And we're trying to address the fact that what traditional literature in scientific articles and monographs do well today is that they handle the narrative and the rhetoric well. They handle most aspects or many aspects of the permanence of the scholarly record well as the quality aspect. Maybe you debate that, but the quality aspect are things that are done well. Less well, to various degrees, are the extent to which we really are fulfilling the promise of scientific reproducibility, of discoverability, of interactivity of the types of content, especially when we're looking specifically at the textual and still image sort of narrowly focused definition of literature here. And then also the timeliness aspect that I think came out a couple times yesterday. So we wanted to have our x-axis across the top here really sort of drill into the researcher's life cycle and the various stages of research that people go through. But we narrowed it down to really the sort of the top level bullets here being recording the scientific record, the things that go on in the sciences, in the lab, but elsewhere. What are the things that are being recorded? What authoring starts branching out into and not just opening up a copy of Word and typing text on paper? And then discoverability, and moving discoverability beyond this notion of it's a free text search box, but really getting into this blue sky scenario here where all of these things are starting to accrue to, and we sort of put this in at the end, we need something pithier, I think, to motivate the research community into the why, but getting to this blue sky of having a useful, integrated, discoverable record of scientific or of research progress. So if you use that, and Alyssa was the one who put the bottom of the stack at the top on the board earlier today. So if you use that as the sort of destination, the time axis is going down or the advancement towards this is going down, then we started to drop into each of these areas, so either in orange or reddish specific tools that are available in each of these areas, or blue, some of the generic technologies or maybe standards or efforts that are going on in these areas as well. And we could blow this out into a spreadsheet 10 times as big and start adding more things into this, and that's where I think we'll start going with that.
Oh well. Sorry, I didn't get that part. You want the last picture?
Yeah, well, I mean, it was kind of a general question, and one that I was hoping that people could address as they go on. And so things that are on there are all related to literature, and then they're also related to several of the other themes. Yeah. And so I'm just wondering if somebody, I've given away my computer, and so if somebody could keep track of the items that appear on like every set of slides, which we can identify as the most useful tools for scientists. And so the ones that I know from going around to the other conversations that have appeared more than once are certainly the bloggy-like tools. So, WordPress, I've seen many times. Etherpad, I've seen many times. Dropbox, let's see, Dataverse. Anybody else from the other groups recognize these as important? Which one? Google Docs, right, sorry, I missed that. Okay, so somebody who still has a computer can make a list like that, please.
We can do a big join on these all.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Yeah.
Probably should have done that after the fact.
Yeah, and we did. We tried very hard to be aware of the other groups that were going on. And tried to not talk about data, but we couldn't help ourselves. And the notion of data papers very much came into the conversation, where a data paper as a sort of an abstract or a marker paper for a separately citable data set was an important notion. Right? Any other questions?
Slightly disappointed it's not an over-the-ear mic, so I can... no one listened to my suggestion. We put Dance Your PhD up as a recommendation. If you don't know it, you should Google it later. It's rather wonderful. Here we go. So like everyone else, I think we spent a lot of yesterday having a fascinating, wide-ranging and ultimately more fun than useful discussion about all sorts of stuff, including what media was. And I think in this context, we decided media was sort of things other than... Sorry, that sounded more profound in my head. Media in the sense of stuff other than the text of the papers. So metadata, images, videos, artifacts created by the paper writing process. We tried to fulfill the command of Alyssa and produce a guide for people who didn't know how to use any of this stuff. So this is what we've got here. It's not at all comprehensive, and I would seriously think that we should probably find a way to put this somewhere where everyone in the room can start adding stuff and collaborating on it, and then have some serious editing. But a guide on how to use media other than text seems useful. So following on from this morning's marching orders, we started with sort of the very low-level stuff. If you don't know how to do screen capture on the Mac, you probably should do. Actually, that's wrong. It's Option-Shift-4. So Option-Shift-3 does the whole screen, so we can correct that live. That's demonstrating our collaborative technique. There we go. Oh, does it? Yeah, okay. So Camtasia's, but then there's screen capture software as well. Jing's free, the others have money. We wanted to make a screencast about screencasting, but that proves to be difficult because they had programmed to ignore their own applications. So we'll do that later. We spent a lot of time talking about versioning, the idea of a complete record of a document's history. So not just the printed paper, but everything that led you there. Which led to this attempt, which I won't read out, but to try and describe Git and GitHub for those who've never used them, which proves to be really hard. I think we've done quite a good job and put some resources up, but if you use GitHub for documents, and you know of a good place on the web to point people who want to use version control through Git on documents, then please let us know. If we keep going. So lots on Git. And name data, which is linked. For blogging, honestly, you could do lots of different stuff, but I think the consensus was WordPress.com is good. I'd like more examples of people using blogs in interesting ways. So I've picked a few examples out there, and should mention, given the co-sponsors of the symposium, particularly Astro Beta, which is a bunch of astronomers writing about exactly this sort of stuff. And it would be good to know if there are other places in other fields where that exists. We tried to think about formats and guidance as a place to go for what you should do. I'm realizing we should have ordered this document. So we have a set of recommendations on good formats and bad formats. Scroll past before Microsoft noticed that Silverlight is on a don't use. We talked about screencasting, which apparently is in the document twice, but there are some examples, particularly like pencasting. And Curtis was the model of brevity in talking about 3D models, so you should use them. There are tools that let you use them, and you should create them. Are we there? Links to video. Oh, that's right. So yeah, no, we have we produced a text document about media, but it has an image.
Like dancing about architecture.
Yeah. Citizen scholarship you've heard from me already, but some good examples of stuff, and that's it. Thank you.
Any questions for media?
Yeah, I thought, what, the citizen stuff? You want me to talk more about citizen science? You should go and do them. You should play with them. So this has been submitted to Tumblr. So hopefully whoever's approving Tumblr posts can do stuff, and all the links are there.
Yeah, I'll fix those links. But anyway.
How do you establish the use versus don't use choices for various?
Where's our format subcommittee gone? Both of them. There you go.
Yeah, I think basically you will find that it will be an arbitrary choice on the fact is it open, is it more or less platform independent, but you'll notice that in the text we are subscribing to the fact that there are choices that you might want to use Flash or PDF because you need that control on rendering, for instance. And then, but it's a matter of fact of making a deliberate choice on are you preserving as much information as you would possibly need in the future as to ease of use. So it's not a hard list at all by any means.
Right, but when a new format comes out tomorrow, how do I know whether it's community use or don't use? Does that make sense?
Only in retrospect.
Well, we pick things that were kind of right now that we can tell people here are some of the new formats you know about that are openly available.
Right.
Like WebM is a good example. And people don't know for video formats, but it's a very open standard.
Yeah. So we're solving the question for right now, but there's no thinking about for the future. How do we determine what's what?
No, I can't really predict what's.
Very good on a group which looks at
Okay.
formats.
Yeah, we attempted to give guidance to people based on handing this document to them tomorrow, rather than making any recommendations about where things should go or what's necessary.
And also ensuring that there's enough mass of this material that we know that will be converters down the road and it's a viable format going forward. Even if it gets migrated to a new one.
One comment, I guess, on the same thing is that we kept butting our heads against. Sorry. One comment was that it seemed really easy to talk about stuff that existed, because that's what we had in our heads for the demo, and it was quite easy to spend a lot of time thinking about completely changing the world, and when the revolution comes, what things will look like in 5 or 10 years' time, and looking on 2 years' time and intermediate steps and things that maybe need to go from the. We talked a lot about maybe on any given sort of set of interactive stuff and tools. Like you imagine 5% of people use it already in academia, then it's easy to talk about the problems of getting that to 100%, but it's really hard to think about how to get from that 2% to 20 or 50%, and that's where the attention seemed to need to be. But that's what drove this document for the 50% rather than everybody. Because if you do 50, you don't need to change institutions or anything. You just encourage people.
Thank you.
Cool. These are just my notes to myself. So, my materials. Roughly 10 experts. There's a slight variation between the 2 days. A whiteboard, a collaborative authoring environment. We use Google Docs, sorry. But very successfully, because it enabled us to work in parallel, and so that seems to be the right thing to do for data-intensive transformation of scholarly communication. Optional use of a projector, and Rachel Bruce was our scribe. Actually, everyone was writing, but she had the tag of scribe. Our methods, definitely a co-evolution of the process as the day went on, or days went on. So yesterday, we started by, like the other groups, discussing what is a platform, and we let that become quite a wide-ranging discussion, which then got completely grounded by going through a sequence of real examples. And that, I think, was very effective. Well, I don't know if the whole group agrees with me, because we got a really interesting social perspective on platforms. So a platform absolutely isn't a software platform. It is a little socio-technical ecosystem. You can read about that in the draft report. And then we looked at the success factors, and then we looked at some failure modes. And with those insights from yesterday and some reflection last night using alcohol and sleep, we today, inspired by Alyssa's desktop, took a very tools-based approach, and we made a long list of actually 61 tools. And then we went through a social, we had a focus group, and we had a voting algorithm, and we clustered those. And we also ran a piece of software to do the same thing, which came up with a different answer. So let me show you. I mean, the outcomes were sort of the incidental artifacts arising from this little piece of research were the spreadsheet, the visualization that came out of the machine algorithm, a very long Google Doc. I've forgotten how many, like 18 pages left or something, and then the draft report. So I'm just going to say something about each of these. So the spreadsheet is dangerous to show you because we could go into a very detailed discussion about individual tools and your favorite tools, but you get a glimpse of what we did here, complete with all the links, as you can see. And what's going on here is the collaborative tagging, where effectively these are the tags. And you can see we've used the research life cycle as a way of building a sort of a narrative somewhere between our high-level thing and the low-level thing in a way that will be useful to researchers, we hope. So all these things score tags in these various columns, and in fact there's a sum there so we can spot the things that had 0 and could be eliminated, because we were very keen to eliminate things from the list as well. And then, what's the next thing to show you? I suppose we have the image from the machine clustering. Where will that be, I wonder? It's one of these, that's the report. Oh, it's this strange thing here, there we are, which you can't really see. But the nice thing about this, in the interactive use of the tool, is you could choose, this is Corey, thank you to Corey who's had to leave us unfortunately. Interactively you could change the number of categories, and it's quite interesting to see how that mapped onto or didn't map onto what we'd done. So it was a kind of a sanity check, and it inspired some discussion. But then the main thing is the report. So I should go to the Tumblr site at this point. Now, where's that? There, cool. Okay, platforms for scholarly communication. And I'm going to say a couple of things, but I should let some of the others in the group comment. And the main authors of this text towards the end of the collaborative process were Tom and Alberto, wherever they are. So, and everyone, it was collaborative, yes. But you have special role, and also the spreadsheet was particularly owned, I would say, by other Tom Kramer. So I'll let them all comment. But let me just say a couple of things. So there is, what is a platform? It's not just software, it's an ecosystem. It includes software, data, services, people. It's in its essence socio-technical. And we took early on the view that actually our Uber platform for this is the web. Okay. And that later on helps us to define failure modes, because failure modes are things that don't follow the web type approach, which is quite interesting. So we looked at successes. This is a particularly social view. We used important terms like social objects and boundary objects, and even momentarily, what was it? Ontic pivot. Yeah, cool. So as I say, we got the problem surrounded and we came at it from an interesting direction. Very social. And that, I think, was very important. That's consistent with the success factors. And then you can see some of the things coming up here. We looked at success, we looked at failures and failure modes. Or maybe we shouldn't use the word failure so much as lack of success, I don't know. And we identified some unresolved problems, identified some promising platforms, so that's the future look. And then if you go through this document, you see we then give examples. And this is the result of the human clustering. And it's the kind of desiderata. If you have a successful research environment for data-intensive research, you probably have something in each of these categories. And here are some examples which got the most votes from us. Oh, those aren't examples. Those are people who were involved in creating this document. So let me stop there and invite the others to add things, and in particular the insights that they've gained that they would like to share with the room. Any other comments, Alberto? Yeah? Okay, so should we go for questions and then everyone can answer?
More comment.
Chris?
Have you documented the process by which you go up and down? That looks really interesting, and I think I'd like to steal it. Sorry, I mean use it.
Yes.
So yeah, could somebody write that down or make software?
Yeah, sharing methods is very, very important in this. Yes. I started that in the email to myself that you saw on the first, when I plugged the laptop in, so I will complete that process. Questions?
I think I'll make a comment from something that I think came up in talking about what is a platform. Was also that platforms co-evolve with social requirements. They co-evolve, they're not fixed, right? Yep. They evolve as an ecosystem, not as a monolith.
And with that comes a timeliness to the platforms. And the notion of the, what kind of monster was it?
Hopeful monsters.
Hopeful monsters. Right. That's not in the report. Any other questions? Comments from the group? Sure. What would you like to see, Alyssa? Well, let me just give you, let's go to a heading. Look, this is the appendix, right? And these are the examples. Yeah.
I don't know what's wrong. If anybody knows what's wrong with the Drop It To Me site that worked yesterday,
yeah.
Nothing happened to it, and now it doesn't work.
What's this? Martin?
I'm just slowly scrolling up while...
I mean, you were too fast for me to look at all these things, but I spotted some of them that are sort of new and exciting, but not something I would recommend to somebody who's just starting with this stuff. So did you consider, like, this is proven, this works, and this is sort of to play around with, to make that distinction? Because that's one of the traps, is that there are all these exciting tools, but we get lost in them, and we try these all and they don't quite work, and there are 5 others that do something similar, and so how to solve that?
So whether something is a proven solution or something to experiment with is very much in the eye of the beholder, of the researcher in question. And we didn't address every possible research community, although there was discussion about communities that hasn't come through in what I've presented. In terms of what's presented in the document, we did go through this process of identifying exemplars in the various categories, but then having lots of examples around those in order to have a broader set of recommendations. We didn't specifically focus on sort of novice versus expert, and I think that's obviously an important trajectory. I don't know if anyone else has any comments on that.
To add to that, one of the things I didn't talk to on our slide is that we looked at a number of emerging technologies that were addressing some of the gaps that have been identified, and then also realizing different take on what you're saying, Martin, in that this isn't necessarily an established technology or good for this class of user or bad for this class of user, but we did look at the technologies that were, in some cases, addressing a gap that existed, but perhaps to the detriment of some of the other facets that we felt were important. So, to pick an example, Dropbox came up as something that was great because it made it very easy for people to share information with very little time investment. It was dead simple. But then the question of versioning and of security and of permanence of that situation need to be flagged up as part of the sort of conversation when you're picking a tool that's fit for task.
Any further questions? Okay. Thanks very much, Lee.
You're welcome. Thank you, David. And next up will be resources.
The thing about this is Merced and I, thanks to Tim, actually started a collaboration about a week ago, and we never met, except on Skype, and now we're doing this to start things off, so it's all promise of the future. So I have to say that we probably, like everyone else has alluded to perhaps, we grappled on the first day quite significantly, and I actually wonder, and in the end we came up with a conceptualization that was probably fairly close to what other people have used, and it would probably have been better if we'd have all started from that same framework in the beginning and populated it accordingly. So something to think about for how these things are done in the future. So we have the... It's there somewhere. Yeah, there you go. Okay, so in the end, we came up with this conceptualization, or two kinds really. One in terms of, well, of course, we had a long discussion of what resources are and how broad a scope that implies. But in the end, we came up with the notion of fairly obvious. I mean, it's hard, you look at all that effort, and you see this, you wonder how it took so long, but that's the way it works. Basic resources, create resources, share resource, discover and publish. But then, as others have alluded to, and perhaps we just articulated a little differently, we cast this into effectively, in a sense, it's a sort of research pipeline, but it's really actions of the researcher. So plan and discover, generate ideas, collect data, analyze, disseminate and visualize and impact. And we discussed a whole series of tools around each of those actions. And then what we've done, if you could just scroll down. So we then sort of took the documents, just this figure first. So this is the total notion of the document expressed as a tag cloud. And you can see that, I think, interestingly, some things really do pop out here. So clearly, the central role of data in all of this, which in terms of in some ways of thinking is underrepresented, but clearly I think that highlights why it's so well represented here. There's the emphasis on the need for it. I think Google is there, in essence, really reflecting the discussion we had about the role of the cloud in all of this and where things are going to sit in the future. And then, a series of other things, obviously the tools themselves, where things happen and the communities and so forth. So this was sort of the overall notion. And then if we scroll down a bit more. So this was the things that were identified around the tools themselves. So obviously the kinds of things that you've heard already, WordPress came up, Excel came up strongly, Dryad, wiki spaces and so on. So this is sort of a manifestation of the summary of the tools that, and I mean, there's tools associated with visualization. So, but that's we had a strong astronomy group representation in our group. So I think that's one of the reasons that came up strongly. And clearly, there's a lot of very interesting tools there, which would explain that. And then I guess then I'll hand over to you, and you'll talk about some of the things that we actually found in that.
Yes, so then we go into the actual list of resources and tools, and following the sections that Phil was talking about. First, we have the planning and discovery. This section is particularly interesting because it's relatively new in the research cycle. Now we need to be more aware that this is important. That we need the funders require it as one part of it, and there are tools already like the DMP tool from CDL or others that already offer some planning in this part. the process. And then we go into also areas that have, well, that we have new scholarly searches, scholarly engines. Some of them are focused. Let me see if I made this section. Some of them are general, and some of them are discipline specific. And also, as part of the discovery phase, there are more data repositories or other, well, yes, libraries where you can, are important for the planning, but are also important for finding the initial information. So, and then in the phase, well, in the generate ideas section, as Phil was mentioning, the cloud was playing a role in there through either Google Docs and through other Dropbox and other, well, some more standard, well, Evernote, for example, few other tools to help you conceptualize the ideas, right? Like the MindMeister and others like that. Then in the collect data, this section maybe is not as much new because a lot of it is part just databases that have been there for a long time, or spreadsheets, or the use of tools that have, well, I mean, maybe the newest part of it is the GIS tools and taking a role, more cross-disciplinary role in collecting data. For analyze, we put a long list of tools for some statistical analysis, others related to visualization. Visualization in part was considered part of the analysis, but also part of the dissemination. So it's here, and then it comes back in this other section for disseminate, where Mendeley, for example, was an important example for publications management, and one way of helping you is dissemination, but also there were others in terms of depositing data, and yes, and PubMed and other long list. Then and the impact was a relatively also new section, and that we heard quite a bit yesterday from some of the talks, some of the demos. So there are some of the tools listed here. And then for the unsolved problems, the main ideas were that, well, we still need something that captures the research process completely, that it captures the collaboration aspect of the research workflow, that maybe captures the emails. And we listed some of the things that would be needed, but also we thought there was a need of or lack of integration throughout all those tools that we were listing, and are they seamless? How do you go there and figure out which one to use, or using one, how it is somehow integrated with the others? And also the idea that since now there are still, a lot of them are still very discipline specific, there is not enough awareness from one domain group to another. We could benefit from these cross-disciplinary tools. Maybe we did mention an interesting tool that now it's not used for, it's not applied to research, but it's a new website, iftt.com. I don't know if you have looked at it, but it helps conceptualize it. It says, what was the main concept? If this, then that, right? If you do this, then, so it just, if you have that trigger, what will you do next? And maybe a similar idea could be used for conceptualizing the research workflow. And then the very last point is that we had to do this 2-minute or the elevator pitch to a researcher, maybe we thought it would be easier to say, instead of trying to in 2 minutes tell them all these list of tools, be able to say, here we have a research Wikipedia style or wiki style site where there is information about all the resources and tools that they are used by research and in a way rated by researchers. Phil put the example of this Pedro's list, and maybe what we should come out of that is something like that. It's a registry of resources and tools, or a wiki style site that rates these tools, and then we would just tell them in 30 seconds, right, go there and look at that.
So just to sort of elaborate on that, Pedro was actually an unknown graduate student in 1995. You can actually find the site, who on his own gumption basically created this list which became the controlling influence in the field. This was before any kind of search engine really, except for maybe Ultra Vista. And so when this graduate exerted enormous power just by evaluating these resources, it drove researchers to actually improve their web resources to actually get a higher ranking in Pedro's list. And so in these early days, you could imagine that if you had an authoritative ranking that was done, and this obviously perhaps crowdsourced at this time, that actually was there to look at, I think this would be very invaluable to researchers to actually have a quick place to go, see what others are thinking, and then select something and try it out.
Right. So.
Does the rest of our group, did we forget anything we should mention? Questions?
Lisa?
No.
Alisa?
Discuss later.
Could I see the
We were having a discussion over lunch with some of the people from the foundations in particular, and they were saying that the kind of wiki-like sites or software tools registry-like sites that some of us might envision don't stick around because there isn't somebody whose job it is to actively maintain it, or some group of people. So if we can think of ways that something like what we've done here could turn into such a site and then can be maintained in some actively supported way, that would be good. So try to answer that question in your heads.
Just find Pablo, right?
Pedro. Pablo is the.
Or we'll just elect a new Pedro from the.
So things like workflow and viz trails are not on your list.
There were some workflow. Somebody from the group, do you remember where we put them?
I think there is something there, but not. It didn't feature extensively, I have to say, in our discussions. And
right.
My own interpretation of that, of course, Davey won't like, is that for a lot, if we're thinking about impacting the maximum number of researchers, I don't think they're thinking. A lot of them is actually at the point of workflows yet. I mean, that's my own personal interpretation. It's not necessarily what the group came to.
Can I just ask a quick question for just a second? Did somebody upload a file called test.docx to the Drop It to Me site 10 minutes ago?
Yes.
Who did that? Successfully?
Yes.
With this password? The
Yes.
MSR?
I just wanted, you said it wasn't working, so I thought I'd try. but then I couldn't find the site to see what else we said.
No, you can't see it at the moment.
Okay.
No, that's on purpose. My Dropbox. But, okay, so it works sometimes, is the answer. So if you have stuff to upload, try again. There's nothing I can do.
You can write a script.
Sorry, Tim wants to say something.
So people were mentioning doing a website, and the Force 11 group agreed to set up a website and keep it in an ongoing community, a Drupal-based website as a web community that people can join and participate in. And basically the site is built and we're just loading content now. So why do two things, right?
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Actually, if I can add to that, somebody was mentioning Astro Better, so better tools to do astrology or astronomy. So maybe we could have like Skullcom better or something, you know, better tools to do scholarly communication. If we can all collaboratively blog tools that we come across, because this is a very much a snapshot. 2 years from now, half of these will have died out, and you know, whole new ones will have come up. So if we could just maintain some of the lists that are generated today, that is a great resource to start with. We have a page of stuff that has been cumulatively added to and then structured from beyond the PDF onto the Force workshop, which will be on the Fork website. But you know, some place where all these tools and maybe some reviews or comments, you know, could be posted. I think it would be very useful.
Anita, I would say that the commentary is absolutely critical. It's like Consumer Reports. You really got to have that. Otherwise, it just looks like for an average researcher, it's just an overwhelmingly long list without any pointers. And
that's why it's good if it's
if we can actually characterize the content of those tools, you know, by some simple scheme, that would also be, you know, really, I think, be very valuable.
So the site is force11.org, and it has a tools and resources tab already. It just needs populating.
But Tim is building it right now.
Yeah.
So wait about an hour.
Thank you very much. And recognition? Review, absolutely.
Where are we? Review? I'm going to take a slightly different approach. I'm going to sort of stay at the high level and not show you our document.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, so if you want to look at this document while we're talking about it, there's a link within the site to, there you can see it there, to a Google Doc. So
Where's the VGA cable?
Here. Use that. I could have just linked off of that. Do you want to just use this? Because it's right here.
I'm not showing the document.
Oh, you're not going to show that?
No.
Okay. I'm sorry.
So we did not wander around the first day because of Amy. So we had a great not that you didn't have great facilitators, but Amy did a wonderful job. See if this works. Okay, so I'm going to talk about review. And to get started, let me give a little of the context that we put our conversation forward in. That this notion that the new communication technologies offers all sorts of new opportunities and complexities to evaluating material. We have lots of different types. We have new types of publication. So in the old days, we had these things just called paper publications. We had journals, and there was a fairly limited set of things. Now we have a whole set of new things that we have to review and that have to be accounted for in the review process. And also this notion that there are new audiences, that we have, instead of just the same circle of people in our field reading our materials, there's wide availability, and they need to be accounted for in the review process. So we spent a large amount of the first day talking about what is review. And we decided that review refers to several different events in the scholarly communication process. Scholarly has several functions in the workflow. You want to review the whole aggregate of a person's work in terms of talking about tenure and promotion and things like that. And you also want to talk about evaluating a single work in their career. What should I look for? What's the best work? What's the best thing I should find in this topic area? We also, evaluation is both qualitative and quantitative, and those serve separate functions. And we want to encourage both pre-publication and post-publication stages of review. So we want to stop things as they're coming down the pipe, or at least control things, and then control and talk about things after they've come down the pipe. So we developed what we thought of as the future vision for review, which is the diminishing role for pre-publication evaluation, and the diminishing role of review as it exists at the present time. This notion that the high costs And some of the problems in review as it exists now, we want to encourage a diminishing role for that. And I'll talk about how to maintain its functions later on. But we felt very strongly that in the best cases, it's very hard to do this with glasses on. Maybe I should look over there. Maybe I should stand over here. There we go. That's better. That in the best cases, in cases like Science and Nature at the very top of the chain, pre-publication peer review works very, very well. In many other instances on the chain, and as you walk down that pyramid, pre-publication peer review starts to work very badly. So we wanted to recognize that fact. And we also wanted to recognize the fact that new systems for post-publication evaluation are poised to take a larger role in what happens in this world. So our future vision of reviewers is a broader definition of peers. That, as I said before, that as the materials that we produce are available to much broader audiences, there's a much larger notion of who reviews and who acts as a reviewer. And that's very important to recognize and very important to account for. We can't assume the old world in which a small circle of people acted as the review mechanism. But the problem with this is this adds a huge amount of complexity to the system. Whereas before you had a very controlled space in both the dissemination of the material and the review of the material, now we have a wide open space, and we have a very complex situation that complicates things in terms of what's the expertise of the reviewers, how do you rate them, how do you deal with negative reviews from people who don't know what they're talking about, how do you review materials that are very different from those that have been reviewed before. So I stated the fact that the existing system has problems, but there's some things we really want to maintain in the system as it moves forward. And point number one is we want to maintain the notion of filtering. It is clear that one of the best aspects of the current review system is that it filters out, in most cases, junk. And in most cases, it allows the good stuff through. So we certainly don't want to have this information deluge and get rid of that filtering function. The second thing is we want to leverage the trust we place in our peers. We trust their expertise, we trust their honesty, we trust their integrity, and we want to move that trust mechanism forward. And then the last thing is we want it to be easy to use. We felt that one of the things that's extremely important is that we don't impose new burdens on top of the scholar in new review systems. Because as we impose new burdens, they're going to be resisted, and people aren't going to follow through on them. So these three important notions of filtering, trust, and easy to use is very important for us as we carry forward. So one of the things that we also set down is a very important caveat, and that is one that's very near and dear to me and near and dear to other people, that scholars across the board are not the same. That different fields, subfields, disciplines, cultures, geographic regions, demographic characteristics of the scholar themselves make them have extremely different behavior. And there is not one blanket solution, and that any technology that tries to pretend that we're all the same or forces upon us practices that are not part of our own cultural heritage will fail. And I think we would need to recognize that across the board in everything we're doing here, and it's something that we have to account for, and it makes cyber infrastructure and all of this stuff very, very difficult to implement. So if you take a look at our document, what we did is we like everybody else, have linkages to a whole bunch of things and interesting technologies as we move forward. And we tried to pay attention to the fact that these are things that people could use now. And the tools we suggest fit into two classifications: tools for the consumers of scholarship, how to find the good stuff, and tools for the producers of scholarship, how to make sure your stuff is given its just rewards. So I'm not going to go through those tools. You can look at the document and get those. But we came out with a strategic agenda that was sort of a summary of all the tools. And thing number one in the agenda is the notion of author identity. That we feel that it is extremely important as we move into new review systems that we have some notion of unambiguous identity of authors. One of the largest problems now in figuring out how to review things and how to figure out who is the problem of disambiguation. The second thing was to be able to disambiguate items across a bunch of different sources. The third one is defining and developing standards for metrics and metadata. That we have a distinct problem now that different metrics exist in different places and are applied in different ways, and it's very difficult to walk across these walled gardens and have consistent metrics across them. Another one is to open up the common social media tools to develop more open environments for data interchange. That a lot of stuff is happening in places that are walled gardens, Facebook being the most notable example. It's very difficult to get information out of Facebook, if not impossible, and we need to open up those walled gardens. And then after that is to pay attention to non-Western tools and services. A lot of our attention is based on things that are US or Western European based. There's like Twitter. There are whole parallel efforts happening in places like China and India. And the last one, or the second to last one, is propagate the adoption of open peer review. And lastly, encourage researchers to take individual responsibility for maintenance and correctness of their scholarly record. And the important point there is to get scholars to understand that it is their job to maintain their scholarly record in an unambiguous fashion. And we talked about tools for doing that, such as Vivo and other things like that. So that's a summary. I'll let you look at the details on our document. And Amy, did you want to add anything to that?
I think that among the themes that emerged in our group and the document that you see is the result of a real collaborative process where this, obviously, we've all been talking about a broadened definition of the literature of the scholarly record, a broadened definition of peer and who has a voice in the review process, and then what could really affect change are scholars taking more ownership of their bibliographic legacy and their reputation. Those were really the large themes that emerged for me. Does anybody else from the group want to comment? And I don't know, maybe we should just link to the document if you have.
Put that up there? How do you do that? You press something over here.
Could you actually just want to, if people aren't looking at it, I just want to, we did do our homework and we have lists of many tools there as well. So
we jokingly said that maybe we should just wait for the bunch of us to die off and let the new generation come in and that'll solve all the problems. But since I don't want to encourage myself to die off yet.
It's just linked to, no, but just turning it, because we're not linked into that. So it was just a matter of.
Oh, yeah.
Sorry.
Oh, yeah. It's the amazing thing of a wire.
So.
It's amazing how often it's a 50-50 chance and you do it half the time, more than half the time wrong.
How to scroll down here.
You want me to? Do you want me to go down to the tools?
Yeah, just if people wanted to look at them and had any questions or
So
additions.
as I said, we distinguish our tools as either being ones for the consumers of scholarship or for the producers of scholarship. And you can see our list here. I won't bother to read them off for you.
And I think it's a good sign that we're seeing, some overlap with the other working groups as well. So, any comments or questions?
I should say in the next section, the currently unsolved problems, solutions, and strategic opportunities are some very difficult research type problems. So moving, I feel strongly, and I think other people in the group felt that moving beyond the sort of initial tools requires a lot of big changes, behavioral changes, institutional changes. Things like, as we know, review is the basis of tenure and promotion. And there's a whole culture of that being based upon a certain characteristic. Changing review causes fundamental changes in that system, which are hard things to do. Questions, comments, additions, tomatoes? Yes.
Obvious to everybody else, but could you speak as to why pre-publication review goes downhill from the top journals, and then later on in your strategic argument, you suggest that we should adopt open peer review, which is a pre-publication. So how does that differ from typical?
I may not have said that as clearly as I wanted to. So I think, and Clifford might want to contribute to this since he stated this quite eloquently, that for the top journals such as Science and Nature, you clearly have a system that works really quite well. You're able to attract reviewers because it is an honor, for example, for me to serve as a reviewer on Nature and Cell and things like that. As you walk off that cliff, you get into a world in which it's hard to convince people to be reviewers because it's not as much of an honor, and therefore we end up in a system where people have to be either begged to be reviewers, paid to be reviewers, or sometimes they've got not other things to do with their lives. So I'm not trying to degrade reviewing and peer review in general. I'm not trying to degrade those journals, but it just the system falls off, the quality falls off quite abruptly. Actually, I'm going to let Amy talk to that because that's more. Yes. I stole that from the document. So.
Yeah, I'm going to call upon from other people in the group that are experts on more on this area. That basically one of the other in terms of improving a more open system going forward, that we need ways of rating the raters and an openness around review and rating in general. And we see some of this working in post-publication review and systems that we saw demoed yesterday, like Faculty of 1000. And I think there were in our discussion some journals referred to where we see it in pre-publication, like BMJ, but I'm not an expert in this topic. Sarah, do you want to say anything?
I think that we all agree that pre-publication peer review isn't going to go away, and I'm not sure that we all agree that open peer review is important, whether it's post or pre, but I believe that transparency is important in all of science, and that even thumbs up and thumbs down, I think there should be more of that. I think there should be more commenting, and that I would love to see that take the place ultimately of the intensive formal type of pre-publication peer review that happens. And I think that the time that is freed up of scholars from that element should go into shorter commenting, serious commenting with name signing. And I think that the more you get that and the more that you can identify who is saying what, the better science will be. So the open peer review, I don't think it's just pre-publication. I think it goes with everything. And I'm sure there's a lot of disagreement about that, whether that works as well.
Didn't Nature have an experiment with open review, Phil? Somewhere. But I think it was stopped, I seem to remember.
I mean, if I look at the quality of the thought that goes into the peer reviews, I mean, I realize we're at this top of this cliff you talked about, but I just cannot imagine you ever getting that in an open environment for all the reasons that people understand in terms of the time, the motivation, the credit they don't get, etc. So and yes, indeed, we stopped the experiment because we were ready to carry it forward, but there just wasn't enough buy-in. So I think that's just my general response. I mean, we could talk about this a lot, but I found the rest really valuable. Thank you.
Just one caveat, and there have been a lot of conferences and a lot of studies about open peer review versus non-open, and about peer review in general. And I will post some of that on the Tumblr site, some of the references to that. It is controversial. It seems to work in some cultures and not in other cultures. So it's a really useful, healthy discussion to have.
I don't want to belabor all of this, but I will say that we've already intimated this in various ways, that different communities are very different. I mean, I'm thinking of one particular journal, Biology Direct, which has open review, where the reviewers get credit because their name is there and they therefore do a good job. And some of those reviews and the dialogue that goes on in print or on bits between the authors and the reviewers actually is more interesting than the original paper. And so in some cases it can work.
Yes, I mean, Stephen Harnad used to be editor of Behavioral and Brain Sciences, and they used to publish a paper, and they used to get commentaries from 3 people, and so the paper was published along with the commentaries, along with the response by the authors, and he managed to raise the citation impact of the journal enormously by giving people credit for their commentaries, and so academics would do it because it was a high-quality publication.
Well, I was going to add, I mean, I just wonder if Nature's Experiment was too early, and if the you know the community was not ready for it, but it should be revisited again. I mean, we had this discussion. I'm going to call out Jason. Was it last night at dinner or 2 nights ago? We had the discussion about well, I might even ask you to make a few comments about kind of your philosophy about making open comments and sharing that, and how important. And do you want to say anything?
I think that when we want to do open peer review, we're not trying to do something fundamentally revolutionary, even though it seems that way. What we've always done in science is we've linked contributions to the people who made the contributions, and in doing so, not only have we given ourselves the ability to track things back, we've also set up an incentive system to do that. And so a lot of the schemes people have, oh, well, maybe we could pay the reviewers of various things. We've already got the way to pay the reviewers. We pay them the same way we pay them to write papers. We pay them in credit. And people worry, especially as a young researcher, a lot of my colleagues say, well, I would never want to do that. I would never want to criticize someone senior in my field because it would make me look really bad. And I say, well, I would say quite the contrary. If you openly review someone in your field and you write a fluff review, that's what makes you look bad. Whereas if you can actually support what you have to say with good arguments and reasonable arguments, I think that makes you look good. I think that makes you look quality. And I sign every review that I ever write. And I always ask myself before I submit a review, if I'm reluctant to sign it, I say, why do I not want to sign this? Is it because I'm being mean? Well, then I should try and be less mean. Is it because I'm not supporting what I have to say? Then I should try and support what I have to say. So I think the value of open review is that it gives us a chance to apply the same sorts of norms that have guided science very well for many centuries to the things that we're writing out about the science itself. I think that's a really powerful idea, and if we can frame it that way, especially given that, like you said, things have maybe changed in the last 5 years, I think that there's still a lot of opportunities for those kinds of open reviews.
I think you're done. Anyone else? Any other questions? All right, recognition.
Like many of the other groups, the recognition group, we started with quite a struggle to understand what it was we were talking about and how to talk about it and what we were trying to do. And like others, we've used an Etherpad. We have a document. The notes are there. They're pointed at from the Tumblr site, so you can look at them in detail, and comments would certainly be welcome. We benefited a great deal from experience of people from outside the sciences. Historians looking at scientists was one perspective, but also the perspective from the humanities and various types of social sciences. So what I think we recognised is that there's a way this conversation usually goes when we talk about recognition, reputation, and incentives. And the way the conversation normally goes is there are all these other things we think researchers should be doing. Therefore, we have to enable them to garner reputation incentives for doing them, and then everything will be fine. And I think what we realised was both that the culture of what recognition means and how it's applied and how people make career advancement is so radically different across different geographical domains and different disciplines that that can't be a general statement. But the other thing that was key was that at the end of the day, there are a lot of people applying for a small number of jobs and for a smaller number of grants. And you're not going to change the mechanics because there are 50 people who could take that tenure track position. There are 50 grants which you could reasonably fund. And so the process of just providing incentives, just providing metrics,
is not enough in and of itself to change the practice of the panels that are making these decisions. So we had a lengthy discussion. We played around with post-it notes. We talked backwards and forwards, and we didn't really bottom out the issues necessarily. But then we went away overnight and came back in the morning, and we did something slightly radical. We did what we were told, which is that we framed a couple of questions that we thought were worth tackling. I'll just go down. Oh no, they're not. They're split apart now. So what we've done is actually we've written two documents that are essentially intended as, don't do that, conversations, descriptions, things, a document you could put in front of the person down the corridor. And it takes them through the process of why they might, in the first instance, of how they might go about enhancing the recognition that their work receives. What are the ways of doing it? What are the tools you might use? What are the approaches that you might take to do that? And then the second document, which is further down the page, asks a slightly different question, but in the same kind of vein, is framed towards a person who wants to take their research and get recognition from the wider community. How do I go about doing that? And this is kind of with the idea in mind of maybe someone who wants to leave the research community and demonstrate how good what their skills and expertise are to the outside world, or someone who wants to communicate or interact with the wider world coming back to them. So either people are looking for more media attention or perhaps interested in taking part in expert panels or as expert witnesses in court trials. So I don't see any real value in me reading those documents out. They include lists of particular services. They're quite focused. Feel free to read them. Does anyone from the group want to add anything to that, or is there something I've missed? So this is the notion of a researcher looking for recognition. So a lot of this is about, how do you get your stuff out there? What are the tools you can use to expose the work you're already doing? And also a lot of this focuses on effective use of profiles, effective use of existing services, say reference managers, ways to help people find you, where you've been and what you do, where people can find you in the real world. And then there's sort of an extended list of tools in those categories. And then this one's really much more a kind of a little narrative story. I mean, it's literally intended as something you put in front of someone. Say, here's how you go about it. So it's not actually organised in a structured way.
Thank you very much. All right, so we've... So I'm getting 5-minute break. All right, we're going to take a 5-minute break now. So we'll let everyone enjoy cup of tea or coffee, and we'll pull everyone back in here, and then it'll be Marguey, myself, and Alyssa will do a wrap up, and we'll have some discussion. Thank you. What we'd like to do now is invite Marguey to, I guess, put you in the precarious position of trying to summarize and bring some sense and pull some threads together from across the 2 days. So I'm going to ask Marguey to make a few comments, and I might join in as well. But I'll over to Marguey.
Hey, this is of course pulled together.
Make sure it's on.
This is thoughts pulled together fairly quickly, and this is the synthetic part of the day, and this is the feel-good part of the day. So my thoughts on transforming scholarly communication are, I just want to say they're informed by my work in scholarly communication for the past 10 years. My first job in publishing was assembling a neuroscience reference book, and scholars submitted work from all over the world, and one of the things that they submitted to me were videos of fMRIs, and of course we had there's nothing we could do with these, but I was always struck by that that problem of scholars are producing this material and we're not able to do anything with it. How can we go from there? And we still haven't solved that problem, but that informs this. So what do we consider to be scholarly communication? As we know, scholarly communication can be quite broad, from concise observations and ideas transmitted directly to interested readers via Twitter, to massive reference works composed by an army of contributors carefully selected by esteemed advisory boards with an expected shelf life of decades. At one time, the material that was circulated by a publisher that stamped its imprimatur on the work, and therefore its quality. The publisher vetted this work via peer review and only took on work that would justify the expense of publishing it. Now, of course, anyone can publish just about anything, and in many cases this is good as we have access to many more types of information, but it's also raised issues in terms of quantity, quality, and accessibility, all of which were raised here this past 2 days. From my vantage point, floating from group to group, the most consistent themes were time and visibility. Simultaneously, we have too much material, both your own research as well as an always growing body of material in your discipline, and who has the time to keep up with all of this? So breaking that down further, we have issues of authority. How do we know who and what to trust? This was brought up by the recognition and the literature group. Discoverability. How can people find your work? How can you better filter through the massive body of material to find the scholarship and research that's useful to you? Recognition within scholarly literature and visibility within your scholarly community. Recognition within both the collaborative and social tools, as well as with traditional channels of scholarly publishing. And community and collaboration, which I think is the biggest one here, is that most of the research that's done here is collaborative, and it takes a community of scholars to work on this. So participation is a key component to scholarly communication, and more oftentimes an expectation. And this is both within the writing as well as in with the actual research that you're doing. A lot of the tools that were brought up here are precisely those kinds of tools on workflow, as well as how can you share this information. So we're looking at participation from the level of actually doing the research to deciding what research is important and what research you should read. Everyone in this room, at least in this room here, is aware that research and scholarship is not a solitary pursuit. It literally takes a village. Your work builds upon previously established facts, whether it perpetuates or disputes these, and your colleagues, if not directly participating in reviewing it, are informing what's accepted and what's not accepted. The concerns here are with simple popularity metrics. This can be a useful tool for you sorting out what you might want to consider and what you might not want to consider to put in your queue for reading. But other concerns I have as an editor are that certain scholars will receive increasingly more attention. The rich will get richer and the poor will get poorer. There's a worry that scholars and scholarship will get buried in an extremely longer tail of work. I also have concerns about transparency in the peer review process, as I worry people won't get a fair assessment on their work. I am looking at this through books, and I haven't ever participated in a journal review process, and that could be a very different situation. But as an editor, I filter out a lot of snark and hostility that comes in through reviews, and there is a lot of that. And as well as clear attempts by reviewers to align oneself with a particular scholar or group of scholars. Neither of those things really help scholarship, and those are important to either push back against the reviewer to to rethink those comments, or to certainly filter those out to the scholar who's receiving these comments. So a component of my work as an editor is selecting the right mix of people to assess a particular work, and I worry that leaving that open will not result in quite the feedback that could make this work as good as it could be. So another issue is the audience. So audience now extends beyond your disciplinary peers, and more often it extends beyond the academy and research sector into the public sector. So to put this into, so I work primarily in the social sciences and humanities, and one scholar I work with a fair amount is Dana Boyd, who's actually upstairs. So she's broken considerable ground in the social sciences with her research blog and her use of social media. Dana posts regularly on her blog, and this work is often of the rigor and complexity of much of what is publishing. However, Dana also recognizes the value of different media for different messages. What works on her blog, in the blog, which is great because it receives immediate feedback, addresses different issues than you would have in a journal article or within a book. And some of the material never leaves the blog, but each tool reaches a particular audience and serves a distinct purpose. And that, I think, is really important with all the tools that are being presented here, is to figure out what material is the best thing to go through which particular channel. So another question I've been thinking through this is, what is the role of a traditional scholarly publisher here? I'm not sure I have an answer, but I do have some observations. So clearly, scholarly communication needs to move beyond words and print. Fields of inquiry have changed dramatically since the dawn of scholarly publishing hundreds of years ago. Research encompasses subjects requiring massive data sets, highly complex procedures, and massive collaboration. And this surely wasn't considered, when scholarly presses were first started long, long ago. And as Sharon Tariq of the Recognition Group reminds us, the scholarly journal article has remained a stable, enduring standard of scholarship. She wisely reminds us of the difference between documenting process and documenting results. David Schotten of the Literature Group echoed this by describing a peer-reviewed journal article as a line in the sand upon which knowledge is built and captures a scientist's understanding of his work at a particular time. So perhaps we need to distinguish between scholarship and research, with scholarship being the codified results and research representing the process. While these are two halves of the same whole, each require a different approach, different tools, and again, have a different audience. So as scholarly publishing goes, I think we do need to be judicious in what we choose to document, which channels through which we choose to transmit it, and the audience to whom we're addressing. Embracing different tools and channels for different material will be the challenge. This comes with a certain risk, however, as do we know how to handle the subjects of preservation and persistence. This is something that books, this wasn't as much of an issue with, but with all these digital objects of many different types, I don't think we've really answered that question yet. So what's exciting to me in terms of scholarly communication is now all this material publishers used to consider ancillary, such as data sets and video and workflows, color images, and rich media, now can be integrated into what we consider the text, and that's funny that we still call it the text, with the right platform, and could be layered into a single object with different readers engaging with different components. So presuming that we're the 10% of scholars that are playing a role in this change, how can we reach and teach what Susan Schreibman, who's in the media group, referred to as the next 10%? How can we get this next 10% to adopt these ideas and move this agenda a few steps further with colleagues in tenure and promotion committees? That's all I have to say.
I think I'm glad you ended at that point mentioning the 10%, because I was jotting some notes down to myself thinking, one of the main reasons that we have kind of gotten this constellation of people here today is because we look at you as leaders and innovators in the field. And by asking you to come here, by asking you to participate as you have over the last 2 days, we've asked a lot of you, but I think there still is a responsibility that we have to help lead the field. All of you are doing amazing things on the web and in your scholarship and in your research every day. And as leaders, I do think we have a responsibility to share that back. And so what I'd like to do is change the, shift the discussion now to how we can do that. So what are some of the things that we can take away from these 2 days, and how can we turn around and make that available to the rest of the community? So if we wanted to, I'll ask Melissa to join in as well, as to how we can, we have some ideas, but we'd like to kind of solicit some additional ideas from the group. Some of the obvious things that came up was the creation of a website or some sort of web presence or a wiki where we could document these tools. There were many that were the same tools that were brought up across the different groups. We can winnow those down. We can add that. There's even an offer of putting this on the force11.org site. Is that something that the group thinks would be valuable? Is that something that we would be interested in having as an outcome from this session?
I think you can imagine various formats and sizes of what comes out of here, and so some kind of core dump of all of the raw material will be on some website somewhere for people who attended the meeting and want to remember what was discussed. Then there's some sort of long presentation we can give that has a lot of that material, but not every single bit of it. And then there's some sort of like super condensed version for the people. Cliff, where did Cliff go? Cliff was mentioning that if you overwhelm people who don't know anything about this with too many choices, that they'll just give up again. And so there's kind of actually the sort of magazine article approach where you sort of give them a teaser by giving some examples, not unlike Consumer Reports versus Consumer Reports website, which often has more information. So we can do any of those things. we can use social media, we can use airplanes with things flying behind them. I don't know. And so if you could just think about your own experience and how you learn about these things. Curtis was asking me, how do I find out about these things? Is it from my postdocs, from graduate students? And some, yes, and some because I read Wired magazine, and some because I talk to all of you. And so in other words, how do you find out about these things? And if you can just tell us that now in a kind of free-form way, and if somebody has a great idea for a URL to put all of this down on and link it to the Force 11 site, great. So this is just meant to be kind of a free-for-all. If you could tell us all that for the next.
I'm gonna cede. Well, let's ask. Amy's raising her hand.
Might want to do. I do lots of faculty development events at my institution, and we've done lots of events on how to get your work published, et cetera. But as a result of this, I would like to do a series of events for faculty on managing your reputation and using, and this is more related to the review topic that we worked on, but in general, using different scholarly communication tools. And I wonder if other people with an expertise who are inspired by this meeting can do the same in their communities. So
we could maybe break some of this down into pieces that people who wanted to give presentations about this to their colleagues and at different institutions could kind of have a pre-made set of things. Maybe just that would. Cliff also and many other people makes the good point that this is going to be stale in about a week after we put it out, but it'll be good for a little while.
Right, and I in my case at least I wouldn't be I would invite several other people who have expertise in particular areas, but I wouldn't necessarily go through the list of all the tools we talked about.
Right. And there's also
really
the issue,
highlight.
of course, which we'd love to hear, of how much community participation you think we can get, and through what format to keep it up.
I was gonna call on Josh to. Sorry, outside during the lunch break, you were talking. We had the little discussion about Roy and Dan's book and the impact that had on humanities. And I thought, would you mind saying a few words about that?
I could, or Tom. Or Tom.
Well, I know it. You know the point you want to make. So.
I mean, so the story is, excuse me, and I know I've said this to different people. One of the things that's bouncing back and forth in my head is, excuse me, comparing the story of how things have played out for the past 7 years in the humanities versus how things are playing out in the sciences. And particularly when I was lucky enough to spend some time at George Mason Center for History and New Media, Roy Rosenzweig and Dan Cohen wrote a book called Doing Digital History, which was a very accessible introduction to the practice of history in a digital environment. And it's not that I thought necessarily that a book's the right format or anything else, but I think the tone and the approachability and the way of framing ideas in that text, which is available online, you can just search for it. It might be quite useful. And I'll just throw out one other point, which is actually just thinking off of the point that was just raised about training faculty. I was trying to think if there's either a straightforward curriculum or kind of packaged workshop or just text about managing your reputation and how that works. And the one thing that came to mind, I don't know how many people might have come across a piece by Phil Agri a number of years ago called Networking on the Network. It's like 10 years old now, and still, it holds up incredibly well. It's sort of a guide for a graduate student to understand how you build a professional career and all the sort of informal things that no one actually tells you or trains you. And it seems like yeah.
Actually, now that I have the mic, I might as well use it. The other thing I might point to is the Chronicle of Higher Ed has a group blog called Prof Hacker, which is mostly run by humanists, and so the issues it addresses are mostly geared towards humanities PhDs. But it deals with these same kinds of issues of the very kind of practicalities of managing reputation and doing digital, but also analog scholarship. And so one idea would be to engage that community. There are some scientists who are part of that project, but I think probably they would welcome some more.
Oh yeah, I was thinking of that next 10%. And a lot of it, I think, can be by personal evangelism, as it were, doing training. We were talking, a couple of us in the humanities here, about maybe going out to conferences and doing a kind of half-day or one-day training attached to conferences where our peers are going, but not necessarily those in the digital humanities and those who use the tools. We've been doing this at the MLA for a couple of years, and it's been wildly successful. And yeah. Yeah, so they're going because it's their field, but not necessarily for the cool tools that they're going to get. But if it's another half day or a day, they might go to that. Both our peers and students would go. So that could be another way of...
Is it on? So, Amy, Alyssa, and Mary Lee and Micah, who is here, we organized 2 digital scholarship summits at Harvard, which was sort of our first internal taking stock of what we're already doing, since at the university is so decentralized, and I thought it was a good way of starting the effort. I maintain the site, and it's called Digital Scholarship at Harvard. It has archives of the 2 past conferences, and what I want to ask you for both an advice on how to integrate this site into whatever this bigger ecosystem will become. That's one thing. Another one is we do. Chris and I want to get very involved in the strategy for the integrated Harvard Library, and one of the 5 transformational opportunities is digital scholarship. So we have a lot of work and very early ideas about how to do it. One is to make any university level decisions with IT and research computing involved. Too bad Zach is not here, Stuart Schieber, they're both on the strategy subcommittee, so we're all working together on making it happen. But there is, given all these developments, I think the Twitter account that we maintain, the social bookmarking which is posted on the digital scholarship site, all of it is a tiny piece that could feed into some sort of system of both learning among us and providing advice to our faculty and bringing the sort of skills of digital librarians to the level that it's required. So, thank you.
So there's been a lot of chatter in the UK. It's strange being back in my hometown and talking about being part of this conversation in the UK. But there's a lot of conversation in the UK. There's been a couple mentions of sort of training, or how do we get some of these tools in the hands of the actual researchers. And some of it is going to be, and a number of us have run various workshops and things, and it's really difficult to actually get to, or to provide that use case for the researcher that all of this stuff matters, unless it's something that provides immediate utility. It's hard to really sell that whole picture. But there's been a lot of conversation in the UK about better preparing STEM graduates or working these things into doctoral training centers. They've got an entire infrastructure of the DTCs that are trying to take more tech-savvy approaches, really change the way that's perceived, because a lot of it is still immediately only associated with the computer science departments instead of the actual people in life sciences research and beyond, and even in the humanities. So I wonder if some of these tools, because I think there's a lot of overlap, could be weaved into this training that is going on in parallel with some of the other higher education programs.
Because I went to one of those events.
One of the DTCs.
Yeah, that's one
and there's a couple
where
of the other
basically
ones
they
going on
asked
now.
me to set that up.
And there's a huge investment on the sort of national level, and the politicians are paying attention and whatnot about really making sure that even if it's something that is somewhat, not I say forced in a nice way, but really kind of pushed in front of them as something that's really integrated into the way that they do their learning. Exactly. So it might be a different approach.
Yeah, on a similar thread, I've got one. I could take 2. On a similar thread, first-year PhD students are a wonderfully captive audience. Yeah. And my department, and I assume most departments, have a mini course for first-year PhD students, which is how to work in the real world, all the sort of things you need to know that aren't related to your PhD but are necessary to be a professional. And I think that it's a wonderful opportunity to instill in them how to manage a reputation, how to deal with these new tools. And I don't know how many people, is anybody else here going to be at the iSchool meeting? Is anybody else in that world? So I think it's a really interesting venue to sort of open that up and start it, at least in information schools.
There's another, one tiny comment, which is that people have this bizarre notion that all young people are all totally savvy about this, and they're not. Some of them are super savvy. Yeah. Some of them are super ignorant.
Some people assume that old people are not savvy.
That's the flip side. We'll go there.
Yeah, so it's a good audience.
Sorry. That was actually exactly my comment, that probably you want a place where these super savvy ones can share their knowledge. So it's a lot of times not a top-down thing, but kind of an across thing. And I really think involving people who are not physically located in Europe or the U.S., and can't travel to such courses, but can be tremendously savvy in figuring how to record research, how to publish it, how to browse it, how to get the right stuff. So some platform where, best methods for getting this done would be useful.
Can I ask a question of Modest Tom here? So Tom is one of the main participants in Ask Your Better. Yep. And can I ask how you get people to so actively participate?
I think we just come across tools that we all enjoy using, and so behind the scenes we're just kind of going, I should really post about this thing, just because we're interested in getting other people to use it. So. So I think there's about 6 or 7 contributors on the blog. So it started off with one person, and then basically we just met various people at conferences that like the blog, and then they're like, but you should really write a blog post about this, and then so we say, well, why don't you write it, and then bring them on board. So
what is that blog?
Astrobetter.org.
.com, I think so. Yeah.
So I was just going to make a tactical point in response to, I absolutely agree that the training, and particularly first-year PhD students, and also there's particular points in postdoctoral careers, is a great place to get to people. You need to be very careful and very tactical about what you're delivering in those contexts, because it's no good getting these young people really excited about this wonderful tool which solves a problem they understand, they get it, then they go back to the group, and it doesn't translate into the setting that the PI is working in, and the rest. Yeah, well, to some extent, but we've become, so there's an accumulating amount of evidence about how successful we are at socialising all of those intentions out of younger researchers as they come through the system. So basically, if you look at trends in social media use, everything once you hit the academy and professional use, it goes 10 years back. And we're really socialising out of people. So the tactical point is that when you give these tools, these opportunities to young people, make sure it's framed in the context of a very clear problem they can solve. They can go to their PI and say, this thing does this, and it's going to be really great. And the PI is just going to turn around and say, yep, so we need to use that.
Let's take one more comment.
Oh yeah, I had 2 different ones. We have something in digital humanities quite like the astrophysics tour. It's called Digital Humanities Questions and Answers, and it works on Twitter, and there's a number of people who moderate it, and tons of questions. It gets archived, and you can ask any stupid or not so stupid question, and someone very happily answers it, and it works really well. The other thing that we've been doing in digital humanities, particularly around the area of evaluating digital scholarship, is targeting people higher up, like the chairs, provosts, deans, because if you get buy-in at that level, it's much easier to have people lower down, as it were, the food chain participate.
Top and bottom.
Exactly. And so, in fact, we have an NEH-sponsored summer school on evaluating digital scholarship. This is in literary studies, and this year it's only being targeted to chairs.
That's a great yeah, full event.
And actually, related to that last point, something I'd like to see is again, it's sort of where you hit them in their process, and people are motivated to talk about their sort of alternative impacts when they're applying for a grant or a job or something. if we can go to these funders who have the standard sort of NIH BioSketch format and have them insert fields in there that ask appropriate, relevant questions, then that's going to force people to think about this stuff when they're filling out their CVs, basically.
Chris is behind you.
Yeah, I mean, obviously it would be great if everyone gave us 5% of our time to communicate on Twitter and so on. So I do see that buy-in from the top is excellent, and funders are a good way of forcing that. But we've got to be really careful what we wish for, because we spent a lot of the stuff that we've spent time talking about and which got people in the room excited is sort of bleeding edge, interesting, don't know why we're doing this, but it looks fun sort of stuff. And being forced to put that into a box that it has criteria that are defined for something from if we're worried now about a document that's going to be out of date, if you have criteria being imposed by senior faculty or funders, you're going to be working to a standard that's 3 or 4 years out of date, because these things take time, and you can end up killing projects.
I think that you're right, but I think that all of us who live at the bleeding edge will continue to live there, and it's a question of just getting the other people, a little closer.
But if you're a junior, sorry.
Yeah.
But the point is, if we think it's relatively less senior people who are already using this stuff,
yeah,
they can happily live at the bleeding edge as long as no one's paying any attention. And so sometimes the last thing you want is senior. I'm going through this. There's a reason I'm talking about this. Is that Oxford's always been incredibly supportive of what I'm doing. I got a job out of what I'm doing. But suddenly the university, in an effort to quantify impact as part of a big exercise we're going on in the UK, now has an interest on maybe what I put on the homepage. So I'm being asked to collect metrics, which we haven't done, and so on. And there's this real clash of cultures that's come from an attempt to ingrain
I'm afraid
exactly
that's
what we're
being
doing.
a victim of your own success.
Well, sure, but then we don't want to generalise that problem. So I'm not, while discussion, my suggestion is that we take it as read that senior people buying into what we're doing is good, and that we concentrate on how to encourage spontaneity and randomness.
Got it. Although it's been suggested.
Anyway.
I just have one last question, and then I'd like to turn it over to Lee and Tony. There was one more? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I just wanted to add one potential complementary approach, and I was wondering, I'm a graduate student, and it's very unlikely that I would get exposed to any of those sort of top-down approaches in an easy way. However, if I'm interested in a topic like this, I might just go out there and search on Google something. And I wonder if we have an interesting tactic here. We have a lot of different people from a lot of different companies and teams and institutions. If we were to put the key information that we learn here into a Wikipedia page, which is considered to be something fairly reputable, and then everybody links to that page back and forth, we get a page that could be extremely high on SEO. So the next time I'm a grad student and I'm just searching for social network for scientists or anything that comes to mind, this is the first thing that comes there, and then I look through it, and that allows us also to have a document that we can update continuously, as well as one that hits pretty much anybody across.
Been discussed, and the only problem is to define what the Wikipedia page is about. In other words, you have to give it a title, and it has to be a particular thing, and so there might be several Wikipedia pages for sort of subsets of these things if we can group them properly. And that would be excellent. My last and final question, and I'm looking at Phil and other sort of publishers of scholarly things in the room. Is it worth trying to condense the results of this meeting into, say, a 5-page document that people might be interested in publishing and reading? Or should we just stick to online and informal venues? It could be an opinion piece in, say, Nature. Phil.
No. However, no. I find the listings that we have produced in these things really, really useful in a number of different ways for my colleagues and me. Some of them within the company in terms of integrating into our, platforms, workflows, whatever, and some in terms of our readerships, where there are different aspects of that I can see coming out in different parts of Nature. So an overall overview, no, I don't think so. But in terms of it coming out in one way or another, I'm sure something will be.
Great. Okay, so I think the answer is to provide the information in as clear a form and as updatable a form as we possibly can, hopefully through some collaboration with the Force 11 group, and then let other people draw on it and update it as they can. Is that general nodding consensus here? I'm done.
whole page about open access and these crazy color schemes, green and gold. It's all completely meaningless.
So it sounds like it's open.
So I think it would be.
I guess we could. I mean, it doesn't seem like a thing to me, but I guess there's a lot of stuff on Wikipedia that isn't really a thing. Go claim it, Paul. Start the page, please.
Go for it.
Oops, anyway.
Got it
No,
for the online thing, Tim and I were just talking about it for the first 11 site. I just created a wireframe of what that page could be. He told me to do it, so I'll send it to him now, and we can get it started.
I think, like we said before, the Force 11 thing is not meant to be limited to the people who happen to come to that particular meeting. It's very, I think, very much an overlap. So really, let's join, forces.
I'm going to sit down now, and I'm just going to say thank you to everybody else on the organizing committee, and tremendously thank you for all coming and putting up with the last couple of days.
And I'm going to echo that, which is, I point back to Phil and setting up the Beyond the PDF meeting, which was back in January. And I think starting the ball rolling in a very powerful way. I think the actual meeting was critical, and we were hoping to carry forward that momentum. And
you did.
I think I have a good feeling like we're carrying the ball. I want to be able to continue that momentum moving forward. But I'd like to thank all of you for coming and participating actively for the last 2 days, or the last 2.5 days. And then I'll hand the microphone over to Tony to say a few.
No, I really just wanted to thank you all for coming again, but also to thank specifically the organising committee, especially Alyssa, who's done a great job, Lee Dirks from my side, but also Mary Lee Kennedy and Gosha and Alberto and Tom McMail from my team. I think they did a great job. So can we have one more round of applause for them? I'd also like to thank our sponsors, Harvard University, of course, but also Chris Mensel from the Moore Foundation, and Josh Greenberg and Katina Rogers, who are here from the Sloan Foundation. So can we show our appreciation to them? And there's one unsung hero who sits out there, Jen Carlson from our support team, who's provided us with food, made sure there was one of the important things in the logistics of any meeting. It was interesting to me to see all the groups yesterday, and then it's important to have a dinner with lots of alcohol, and people sort of loosen up, and maybe they actually could do this. They didn't say that it would, and things suddenly crystallized much more overnight, and even Phil Bourne woke up in the middle of the night with some inspiration, and so Jennifer Carlson is in the Microsoft Research in Redmond, but there's also Jennifer Chase, who's the director of the Microsoft lab on the research lab on the 12th floor, and Paul Oker. So could we give them a round of applause? And then I'm nearly there, all right. There's the AV team, there's the facilitators, there's Marguey, our summarizer, there's representatives from GISC, Magiel and Rachel from SURF, and Rachel from GISC. I think they've both been organizations who have been spearheading and very leading, and I'm grateful for them to coming, and for Mimi from NSF, for example. I have some other colleagues from Microsoft Research, Curtis Wong, Rain Johnson, Derek Campbell, who also came. But really, most of all, the thanks is to you guys for coming, to putting aside the time, and for willing to participate in such an event. And let's see if we can make it something that inches the whole process forward a measurable amount. That seems to me a modest goal, great vision, but a measurable amount forward. It would be great to do that. Paul, and I have to say on record, I disagree with Paul, thing about nonsense about green and gold. Paul.
How do you measure it?
How you measure progress, yes. Well, there are some obviously tangible things, like getting some of these things set up, getting Paul to navigate some Wikipedia pages. There's some obvious things like that, but that doesn't really advance the process. It advances the dissemination. I would like to see, I think the idea of having site where you can have commentaries on tools, so long as nobody gets sued, all right, for putting a comment saying, you know, what tool shall I say? Oh, maybe I better not say. Microsoft Word certainly needs improvement, but you can do equations as good as LaTeX now, as Lee knows. No, I agree, Paul, and I think, can we reflect on that? You know, measuring these things is tricky, but I think we do need to make an attempt. Yeah. Are we all done? I think that's 5 minutes early. Sounds good. Thank you very much. It's a great day. Thank you, Alyssa.